Central banking gets something of a bad rap in the present context. However, it has made an enormous, if not the biggest single contribution to the Western world. Some may gasp at this very statement and argue that it has been the driving force behind colonialism, inequality, war, famine, etc. Although there is some validity to this debate, it is somewhat simplistic in its entirety, as it was also the very system that financed the industrial, scientific and social revolution of the past few centuries. So let's dig a little deeper. This is an incredibly complicated concept and may defeat the viewer on the first pass, so it is important that we take it in bite-sized chunks. Although it is impossible to clearly define the origins of central banking, there are a number of clear landmarks as it has morphed into its present form. Karl Marx argued that the pre-antiquity world was something of a communal paradise, only to be destroyed by capitalist banking classical Greece. Today, we know this theory to be fundamentally erroneous, as he was ignorant of the existence of the Minoan peoples, today Europe's oldest known civilization, who existed around 5000 BC. They were definitely not communalists. However, I think it is safe to say he correctly identified capitalism, banking, as something of a European process. Ancient Greece and Rome were probably responsible for the development of fiat currency, by default of course, which many historians claim was responsible for their demise. And it is here the plot thickens considerably. So let us be clear, central banking and fiat currency are not synonymous. You can have one without the other. More's the pity. As time went on, it became a tie between the Knights Templar or the Chinese who printed the first paper money. Again, let's take a breather. We are now in the Dark Ages, and the three core ingredients of the modern financial system exist: banking, paper money, and fiat currency. This trinity can be used individually, a combination of, or all of the above, and it was the latter that solidified into the Bank of England, the mother of all present-day central banking systems. On initial examination of this cabal between a sovereign head of state and a group of investors leaves one with a sour taste in their mouth. However, it was so successful, every one of Britain's European rivals were trying to model themselves on it not 10 years after its inception. Those who didn't, for whatever reason, rapidly stagnated. And it was here that China and the Islamic world fell drastically behind their European counterparts. This also had the effect of securing Christianity's dominance for the next 3 centuries, hence the relationship between the two. Since central banks, by way of their nature, can print an almost infinite amount of capital, this ends up chasing a finite amount of resources, and European powers sought these through foreign lands, which was the motivation behind slavery and the second and third waves of colonization. This might sound like a damning verdict so far, but we have yet to offset all of the above with an alternative view. It is no coincidence that the first country in the world to practice central banking was also the first to industrialize and the first to abolish slavery, because capitalism came up with a viable alternative to it. To the detractors of this theory, I believe the sum goes: immoral capitalist people abolish slavery for immoral reasons. Moral anti-capitalist people practice slavery for another 150 years for moral reasons. Look at post-Mao China, where capital markets now rival Western equivalents and are welcomed by local governments as they take up residence in the former colonial compounds on the African continent. The same welcome the Europeans received not 300 years before. Again, no coincidence that China finds itself reasserting its military, political and scientific dominance in the 21st century, since it's been tinkering with central banking, just like the USSR before it. Detractors of capitalism and central banking often point out to the devastating consequences capitalism has on the environment. And of course there is some validity in this argument, if not somewhat incomplete, as all the solutions to these problems are begging for, ironically, investment capital. Simply put, it is true that capitalism creates many problems. It is also true that capitalism usually ends up investing in their solutions, which has the net positive effect of driving growth. So what is this infatuation with growth? Easy. Every civilization in the world that hasn't experienced economic growth in the past 500 years has stagnated, culturally, scientifically, technologically, and diplomatically. If you want to survive, you have to grow. End of. It has taken China 300 years to come to terms with the disastrous consequences of not ditching feudalism for capitalism, along with its European contemporaries. But once it did, it is now set to dominate the present century. In comparison, the Islamic world still won't accept defeat upon this issue. Since it is a given that Western dominance is in decline, somebody naturally is going to pick up the gauntlet. And so I put it to the viewer, who would you prefer lead humanity into the next century? Supposedly immoral, capitalist, central banking China, or the supposedly moral, resource-based economies of the Islamic world? Exactly. I have no problem freely integrating to a superior civilization. However, I take great issue with being forced to integrate to an inferior civilization. It is clear the Islamic world is the special needs child on the global stage, not because of ethnic or IQ inadequacies, but simply because the teachings of this religion simply outlaw central banking, the precursor to capitalism. There is a lot of talk about religious reformation within Islam and little about economic, which completely misses the point. I will consider converting to Islam when it is competing in the space race. Literally. Don't tell me what a great civilization you are. Prove it. Surely, if reason dictates, it can't be a coincidence that every nation that has got a man into outer space today has practiced central banking. Whatever for the arguments against banking bailouts, quantitative easing, fractional reserve lendings, etc., central banking has for the most part underpinned the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. Remember, bank merely means bench in Italian. Not to say there are not efficiencies to be made, but if we are going to judge banking on moral grounds, then by extension we are judging Western civilization as a whole.